Dr. Mattie Mosley for, let's just say, a few years. But I never knew about early childhood. And you're going to hear about it today. We've heard stories about the internment and concentration camps during World War II. And those stories, most of them are from the camps that were in Europe. But today, you're going to hear about a little girl and her family in an internment camp on the other side of the globe, in the Philippines. Dr. Mattie Jacks Mosley was born in Manila, in the Philippines, to an American father and an Australian mother. She and her parents were held for 3 years during World War II in the Santo Tomas internment camp in Manila as prisoners of war by the Japanese. After the war, the family came to the U.S. and moved to Marion, Louisiana, where she attended school. Dr. Mosley has a bachelor's degree from Louisiana Tech, a master's from LSU, and a doctorate from the University of North Texas. She's been a teacher, librarian in our public schools, a librarian in Shrevary Memorial Library, and assistant parish librarian in Bossier Parish, before joining LSU Shreveport as one of our original faculty members. In the 30-plus years at LSU Shreveport, Dr. Mosley has taught all of the library science courses as well as children's literature for elementary education majors. She has been the president of the Louisiana Library Association as well as the LSU chapter of the Honor Society Phi Kappa Phi. And on 2 occasions, Dr. Mosley has been awarded an outstanding faculty member by her peers. Dr. Mosley is married to Thomas Mosley. They have 2 sons and 3 grandchildren. And as further ado, Dr. Mosley.
Thank you, Mike. What Mike isn't telling you is he was a student of mine many years ago, and I'm sure he made an A. The events of September 11th, 2001 were so terrible, unbelievable to all of us. The only time that a foreign attack had come on American soil. And then people were saying, well, no, that's not true. There's Pearl Harbor. That was the only other time, right? On December 7th, 1941, the Japanese did attack Pearl Harbor. But that was just the beginning of a hellish day. During the next 8 hours, the Japanese attacked Shanghai, Hong Kong, Wake Island, Guam, and the Philippine Islands. Like Hawaii, the Philippines were an American territory at that time, with American citizens living there. But the attack on the Philippines had the added horror of an enemy invasion. Can you imagine us living here today, undefended city, and a foreign enemy is attacking us? Well, that's what happened in Manila. This foreign army takes over, goes door to door, ordering you and your family to prepare for a 3-day stay. A 3-day stay that would turn into 3 years. Seemingly forgotten by your own country, seemingly expendable. "Now I lay me down to sleep" is a prayer that probably many of you prayed as children. But my mother had me add an extra line to that prayer for 3 years. And that was, "Please God, let the soldiers come soon." I know you're probably wondering why I was in the Philippines, but Mike told you my father was an American soldier who met my mother, who was an Australian. My mother actually was also born in Manila, but her parents had migrated to the Philippines from Australia. She went back to school in Australia to get her RN degree, but came back to the Philippines and was working in an American Army hospital. Meanwhile, my father, who was from Louisiana, was ill in that hospital with typhoid fever. She was his nurse. You know the rest of the story. My father left the military because my mother didn't want to leave the Philippines because her parents were still alive at that time. And I'm so glad he did, because he probably would have been in that infamous Bataan death march, which occurred. 3 years after they were married, I was born. The Filipinos at that time were making progress toward their own government, an independent government. General MacArthur was building an army to establish the security of the islands. But all that changed in an hour. Clark Air Force Base, just outside of Manila, was completely destroyed, and the Japanese army was descending on Manila. MacArthur, in order to save the city that many called the Pearl of the Orient at that time, declared Manila an open city. And he left, first going to the Bataan Peninsula and then to the island of Corregidor, which is in Manila Bay. He was ordered to go to Australia, but not before making that famous speech, "I shall return." Meanwhile, after several months of full months battle, 70,000 troops surrendered to the Japanese, including 12,000 Americans, and then began that terrible, horrible Bataan death march. Thousands of men perished from heat, starvation, or being bayoneted or beheaded. Those who survived were either put in Japanese prison camps in the Philippines, or else they were herded into the infamous hell ships, taken to Japan as slave laborers, working for companies, some of which are still in existence today. Mitsubishi comes to mind. The Japanese entered Manila on January the 2nd, 1942. I was 2 years and 2 months old. It's hard to lie about your age when you have dates. A few days later, the Japanese went door to door, herding civilians who were not Filipino citizens into trucks for their 3-day stay. Thousands of us were herded into those trucks and taken to the University of the Philippines, the University of Santo Tomas. Santo Tomas included about 42 acres, and it was a perfect spot for a prison camp. The campus grounds were enclosed on 3 sides by 12-foot walls. In the front, there were iron bars embedded in concrete with a huge iron gate. There were dormitories and administration buildings, as well as a cafeteria, so it was a perfect spot for an internment camp. During the first months of our internment, families were separated. The women and children were put into the dormitories in very crowded conditions, and the men and older boys were put in the gym, sleeping in cots or whatever they could find. But as the months went by, the Japanese allowed families to build shanties, a little shack, really, on the grounds of Santo Tomas. And my father built us one because he said, if we're going to die together. And Daddy, being a good old Louisiana boy, built our shanty out of bamboo, beaten out tin cans, anything he could find to build. There were inspections every morning in the camp. Everyone had to line up. In fact, there were lines for everything, for food, for showers, the toilet. In fact, going to have a shower is really my first memory of being in the camp. I probably was in my 3s, I'm not sure. But again, it sort of reminds me of, I went to Tech and stayed in Old Harbor Hall that had sort of an open shower, huge room with all these showers lined up. And that's my memory of the showers at Santo Tomas. I remember all the women and children lined up, waiting to take a shower. Some were coming out of the shower. And one woman absolutely fascinated me. I wasn't concerned about people being naked or whatever, but there was one woman who got out of the shower, she had a big towel, and she started drying her back like this. I was absolutely fascinated by that. I wanted to dry my back just like that lady was doing. Whenever we met a soldier in the camp, we were supposed to bow. We had to bow. Children as well. We were told if we didn't, terrible things would happen. I remember so vividly always bowing to the soldiers as they were patrolling the camp. But for some reason, and I have no rationale to tell you for this, but when I would bow, I would chant under my breath, I scream, you scream, we all scream for ice cream. I have no idea where that came from. I'm sure I've never tasted ice cream. But for some reason, this was my rebellion. This was my way of fighting back against the enemy. Another encounter with a soldier came when we had first entered the camp. And I really don't remember this, but my mother told this story. A Japanese soldier seemed to be fascinated by my blonde hair and blue eyes and came over and kind of chucked me under the chin. And I just looked at him and called him a bad boy. Well, in my childish lips, bad boy came out baboy, which in Tagalog, which is the Filipino language, means pig. My mother said she had some serious explaining to do, that I didn't mean that, I meant something else. The food was sustainable that first year. The Japanese had a cafeteria for us. We were able to get some food from the outside. My mother's brother, my Uncle Gib, was not incarcerated. Even though he was Australian, he had become a Filipino citizen, but also he was an electrical engineer for Meralco, the Manila Electric Company. So they needed him on the outside. And for that first year or year and a half, Uncle Gib was able to get food to us. My grandmother, who lived in Claiborne Parish, was also able to get some food to us through the Red Cross. But the food, as the years went by, became scarcer and scarcer. And in February of 1944, the Japanese stopped all outside food from coming in. More likely, they probably confiscated it. And this was known as the year of starvation in the camp. In the fall of 1944, we were down to a tablespoon of rice, 2 tablespoons of rice a day in a cup of hot water. This we called lugao, rice soup. And the internees would put anything else they could find to put in with it. That year, the grounds, any edible vegetation was gone. The grounds were bare. Any cats and dogs that had been in existence were long gone. We really were literally starving. One of the Japanese cooks, the Japanese just assigned people to certain tasks, and one of the cooks they assigned to be a cook was a big black man who had been an entertainer in Manila before the war. We called him Bumblebee. I don't know what Bumblebee's real name was, but he and my father really liked each other because he was from Louisiana originally. And so they got along very well. And thanks to Bumblebee being a cook for the Japanese, he would, when he could, slip us things like rotten bananas or food that the Japanese just wouldn't eat. One time, Bumblebee slipped us a piece of carabao meat, probably too tough for the Japanese to eat. My father cooked that piece of meat under, I remember him putting up a blanket. Somehow he got like a charcoal cooker from somewhere. He put a blanket up over the cooker because we weren't supposed to cook in our shanties or on the grounds at all. So he was hiding the smoke from the Japanese. More than 3,700 men, women, and children clogged the grounds of Santo Tomas. Americans, British, Australian, French, Dutch, Poles. The internees even set up their own government. There were a number of leaders at the top, and everybody in the internment camp was given a job to do. My mother, since she was an RN, was a nurse at the Children's Hospital. My father, since he had been in the military before the war, was an MP. So everybody had a job. We had schools. I attended kindergarten that last year. Another memory that's very vivid in my mind, when I was 4, I had measles, whooping cough, and bacillary dysentery, which is a terrible thing, all at the same time. So I was itching, I was doing other things, and I was especially coughing. I remember 2 things especially about being quarantined in the Children's Hospital. I remember somebody holding me up by my feet to let the phlegm come down from the coughing, because of course that's what whooping cough does to you. But I was quarantined, and I was very lucky that my mother was a nurse in that facility. But my father wasn't allowed in to see me. But I remember one day looking out the window, and there was Daddy peeking at me through the window. And I remember I can't tell you how upset I was. I cried, "Daddy, Daddy, come back." Because as soon as he saw me looking at him, he left. But I survived, as you can see. Toward the end of our imprisonment, the leaders of the government were accused of being spies. The Japanese had become very paranoid. I'm sure they knew they were losing the war. These men were taken away by the Japanese and never seen again until after the war. After the war, their decapitated bodies were found in shallow graves just outside of Santo Tomas. Earlier, 7 or 8 of the younger men had tried to escape. And again, they dug their graves and they were shot with their bodies falling into the graves. Bumblebee, as I told you, was an entertainer before the war. And he would also entertain us in the evenings with his harmonica. He would play folk songs or popular songs on his harmonica, and then he would slowly change the tune into something like "God Bless America" or "The Star-Spangled Banner." And everybody would cheer and clap, and the Japanese would get very suspicious, and then Bumblebee would just sort of slow it down and change it again into whatever folk song he might be playing. By the end of 1944, things had really gotten bad. We were all starving. We had also heard the rumor that the Japanese were going to shoot to kill all of the men in the camp. We had heard that they had already, at the military camp of Palawan, forced all the men there to dig ditches, get in the ditches, they poured gasoline on them, and they set them on fire. 150 Americans were found after the war, those skeletons that were left. Later, we were to hear that General MacArthur had told his men, "Go to Manila, go around the nips, bounce off the nips, but go to Manila. Free the internees of Santo Tomas." In January of 1945, 2 American planes, we could see the stars and stripes, flew low enough that we could see them and dropped leaflets. The leaflet said, "Roll out the barrel." Well, I didn't know what that meant, but from the cheering and laughing and clapping of the people, I knew it had to be good. I know most of you are way too young probably to remember that song, but the Beer Barrel Polka was a popular song during those war years, sung by the Andrews sisters. And roll out the barrel was the first line. Roll out the barrel, we'll have a barrel of fun. Roll out the barrel, the fun has just begun, or something like that. And so the internees knew that was exciting. On the night of February 3rd, 1945, I probably have the most vivid memory of my life. The cries were loud and jubilant and happy that rang through the buildings and the shanty towns of Santo Tomas. The Americans are here. We're free. The first tank of the 44th Tank Battalion, Battling Basic, rolled through and crashed through the gates of Santo Tomas, followed by the jeeps and trucks of the 1st Cavalry. I can't tell you how exciting that was. Everybody was so excited, as I said, and cheering, and everybody was singing what we just sang at the beginning of this program. God bless America. Thank you. As I said, the first tank that broke down the gates was Battling Basic. I have met some of those tankers since that time. What wonderful men they are. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I talked to Fred, a man named Fred Phillips, who lives in Pennsylvania. He's 94, and he's smart as a whip. And he was an assistant gunner, I believe, on another tank called Georgia Peach. That night, as we were watching the tanks and the jeeps come through, somebody picked me up and put me in one of the tanks. I don't know the name of the tank that I was put in, but somebody picked me up, put me in one, and then we kind of came back out and looked, and we rode through Santo Tomas, waving and cheering at everybody. I remember the soldier who was in the tank with me saying, "Hello, honey, you look just like my baby sister." My parents were rushing behind me, trying to keep up with me. All of us were sick for the next few weeks from all the rich food, the K-rations, the Hershey bars, all of that wonderful food they gave us to eat. A few days later, General MacArthur himself marched through the camp. I remember we all lined up and watched him. And if you've ever seen newsreels of him, yes, he looked just like that. I didn't know who he was, and my daddy said, "Mattie Lee, that's the person who saved our lives. That's General MacArthur." And he was. He will always be a hero to me. But it wasn't over. A few days later, the Battle of Manila started. The Japanese were fighting back, and they were even bombing Santo Tomas. It was so scary, so frightening. It was like a terrible fireworks show with all the noise and the lights. And a number of people in Santo Tomas were killed by that artillery. My vivid memory of that was my father kept pushing me under the cot. We were supposed to stay in our shanties for some semblance of safety. And my father kept pushing me under our little cot, and I kept fighting him, trying to get out. I didn't want to be under there. I was so scared. But finally, thank goodness, that was over. For many years afterward, I had terrible nightmares. I would swear to you that I was awake. And yet, here were the Japanese planes attacking me in my bed. Finally, thank goodness, I was over that. I guess today we would call that post-traumatic stress. But it was so real, I can't tell you how real that was. We spent several more months in Santo Tomas. It was wonderful. It was like a holiday. Soldiers were all over the place. We had plenty of food. We had movies. There was music playing everywhere. It was so exciting. In a few months, though, we got on a ship, the USS John Lights, and headed across the Pacific Ocean to the United States. My family had lost everything, but we were still alive. We had a few scares on the ship. I remember one night we were all standing on deck in our life preservers because someone had sighted a Japanese submarine. And we stood there and we waited and waited and waited, but thank goodness it went by us. I remember a funeral at sea. I remember the body being draped in the American flag and then going overboard, all wrapped in white. One of the internees had lived that long and died before he could get home. I remember people saying, the Golden Gate, as we were approaching the coast of California. But as hard as I looked, I didn't see a gate, much less a golden. We spent about a week in California and then took a train to Louisiana to meet my grandmother and my father's brothers and sisters in Arcadia. We had lost everything, but we were alive and together. Out of those 3,700 internees, 2,100 survived. A total of 14,000 POWs had died in the Philippines from starvation, torture, disease. 37% of the military internees, 11% of the civilians. And so I say again, God bless America. Thank you.